Certainly appreciate the presence of each and every one this morning. It's good to see this number out, and we're thankful for those that are visiting with us. We're always happy to have guests here with us, and we want to encourage you to come back and to visit with us at every opportunity that you have. This morning I want to talk with you about an Old Testament story, and it's one that you're probably familiar with, and that we know that from the Old Testament we learn a lot of lessons. Why has this all been resolved, or why has it all been recorded for us? Well, the reason for that is so that we might learn from the examples of people who went before us. And many of them were righteous individuals that lived a godly life. And then, of course, you have some that didn't do that, and we can learn from those. And what we're going to be talking about today is what we've entitled the Valley of Decision. And what we mean by that is that we all make decisions every day of our life. A decision is simply a choice between two or more courses of action. Now, this morning when you got up, you decided whether you were going to eat breakfast or not. You looked through your closet and picked out some clothes. You got into a car, you didn't go saddle your horse or whatever. We all make choices. Now, some of those are minor in comparison. Whether you ate breakfast or not is probably not going to hurt you or harm you. But the point is that some decisions carry serious consequences. But what I want you to know is there is no decision that doesn't carry some consequence, either positive or negative. And so what I want us to think about this morning is, which door are we choosing to go through? What's our choice? As far as being a child of God, no one can force me to do right. And God doesn't try to force us to do right. And Satan certainly can't force us to do wrong. So it's my choice. It's my decision. But what I want to do with you this morning is to look at a man who made one wrong decision. And I want to show you the consequences of that one mistake, that one wrong decision. We generally think, well, that's not going to be that bad. I'll get away with it, or something will work out. But what we're going to do is talk about Lot. Lot made one choice that resulted in his damnation and that of his family, more importantly. The Bible says that Lot was righteous, but his whole family was lost. And it was because of the choices that he made. Now, what we want to begin with is to help you understand that Lot had every advantage that a young man of that time could have. He was raised by his father's brother here. Abraham was his relative, and of course we know that Abraham was chosen out of all of the men of the world to be the father of the nation through which Christ would come. And so Lot has the opportunity to associate with and be influenced by one of the great men of the Bible. He was a righteous man. The Bible constantly says that he was righteous. Now, what does that mean? Well, righteous means he wanted to be right. He wanted to do God's will. And he wanted to please God. And he was blessed with great wealth. So what else did he need? In this time period, he had a godly influence of Abraham and Sarah. He had been taught what was right, and he was trying to live that way. And because he was righteous, because he was associated with Abraham, and he left the Ur of Chaldees and traveled to the land of Canaan with Abraham, he became extremely wealthy. When you're righteous and do what's right, God will take care of those people. But one decision proved to be the ruin of his life. Okay? What happened? Well, as I said, Abraham was rich and Lot was rich, or what that meant at this time was you had large flocks and herds. Now in Israel, it's not like here where we have all this grassland or we have a lot of pasture area. Over there it's desert almost everywhere. And you have to hunt for the grass and take your sheep and goats up into the mountains where there's grass and water for them to drink. So if you've got a large flock here, what does that mean? Well, you're hunting for somewhere to feed and water them. And if you've got two individuals that are striving for the same location, you've got problems. So what's happening here is the servants of Lot and the servants of Abraham are at strife. Now, we don't know exactly what that means. We don't know if they got into fights. We don't know if they argued, but what? Abraham said, "We're brethren." What does that mean? We're family. You moved with me from the Ur of Chaldees, and I love you, is really what he was saying. And we need to work this out. We don't need to be fighting. You know, Abraham didn't say, "I'm the senior here, and I'll choose what I want, and you take what's left." What does he say to Lot? You know, we're family, and we need to work this out. And so he deferred to Lot. He said, "You choose which way you want to go, and I'll go the opposite." Is that fair? Okay, think about it for a moment. Who's the senior? Who's been the father figure to Lot? Who's been the one that's taken care of him and caused him not only to be righteous, but to be wealthy? Why didn't Lot say, "You choose and I'll take what's left"? But Abraham gave him that opportunity, and so what did he do? Well, he chose the plains of Sodom and Gomorrah. Here it said, Lot lifted his eyes and saw the plain of Jordan. It was well watered everywhere. Now you need to understand that. This is down near the Dead Sea. And before God destroyed it with fire and brimstone here, it was like a garden. As it said, well watered. Now, if you've got large flocks and herds, what do you need? Grass and water. If you've got lots of water, you're going to have some grass. Okay, so he said this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. When you go over there today, it doesn't look like a garden. Okay, it's desert, and there's nothing there. But he said this was like a garden of the Lord. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan. Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Okay, key word here. Lot chose what? For himself. So he's being a little bit selfish here. He's only thinking about what's good for me. I've got all these flocks and herds, and I'm rich, and I want to increase those riches. So here's the way to do that. Go to this area where it's like a garden. You know, it says, like the garden of the Lord. What would that be? Well, it's probably the Garden of Eden. It was like that before God destroyed this. Then it says, Abraham settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley, and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Okay, why go to Sodom and Gomorrah here? Well, these were large cities, and if you've got sheep and goats and flocks, what do you want? You want people to buy your wares. You want to buy your products. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. Now we're going to see how exceedingly they were, but the idea here is they were sinners. Okay, this is going to be one of the principles. What happens when righteous men associate with sinners? And it's exceedingly wicked sinners. Okay, now, obviously we can't go out of the world. But I don't have to move in with them. I don't have to become close companions with them. I don't have to put them in a situation where they can influence my family and friends and the ones that I love. But at this moment, Lot's only thinking, I believe, about the financial benefits rather than the spiritual benefits. So, here's what we need to consider when you're making spiritual decisions. What will be the effects upon my family's moral and spiritual being? You know, sometimes we hear people that they're going to move into some area where there are no churches for 100 miles or something. Are they going to get up every morning on Sunday morning and drive 100 miles to go to church? You know, you got to think about what that's going to do to not only your faith, but your family's moral and spiritual well-being. Who will my children marry? Who are they going to seek out for their companions? Who will influence them? Now, we all know the peer pressure on young people to be like everyone else. And so I need to consider that when I'm making decisions that are going to affect my spiritual life. Now, in all decisions, that which is best for our souls is what's best for us. Lot forgot that. Why couldn't Lot see the foolishness of his choice to not only choose Sodom and Gomorrah, but what? It said he pitched his tents towards Sodom. What does that mean? He's getting closer to this wicked city. And when we pick him up in the 13th chapter there, where is he? He's living inside the city. He's influenced by the city. In fact, we believe that the reason he was standing there at the gate and stayed a lot of the time at the gate was to try to warn visitors about the wickedness and the evil of this city. But he failed to look to the future. He didn't count the cost of pitching his tent towards Sodom. And I believe that Lot's decision was made purely for physical rather than spiritual reasons. He didn't put God first. You know, a few years ago we had a little phrase that went around and people put it on necklaces and bracelets and said, "What would Jesus do?" You know, that's a good thought. If I've got to make a decision about my life, I need to ask myself, well, what would Jesus do? If I'm making something that's going to have a severe impact on my spiritual life, I need to make sure that I'm putting God first and not the material things. Okay, what was the result of Lot's choice? Well, he pitched his tent towards Sodom. Why would he do that? Well, you can come up with all kinds of reasons when you want to do something. You can say, you know, sometimes people say, well, I'm going to convert them. You know, I had a nephew that obeyed the gospel, but he had been drinking a lot before he obeyed the gospel. He had a lot of friends there, and he couldn't pull away from it. And his excuse was, well, I'm going to go teach them the gospel. Did that work in the bar? He's no longer in the church today. You're not going to convert people by moving in and supporting them in what they're doing. But Lot wants to sell his products. He wants to get probably more wealth. And so he pitched his tent towards Sodom. And he compromised his own moral standings. As we said, where do we find him? We find him sitting at the gate. And when the two angels come to rescue him, he won't let them stay out in the open. Why? Because what was exceedingly wicked about Sodom was that they were homosexuals. And they wanted to have sex with those two angels. It said men came from all parts of the city. So what does that mean? Well, Lot had to compromise his own moral standings in order to live in this city with these wicked people. Notice what the text says. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young. Okay, the angels are in Lot's house. They've come to warn Lot and his family to get out before God is going to rain down fire and brimstone on this city. If you know how wicked this city, or want to know how wicked this city is, this is one of the few times when God is going to rain down fire and brimstone and destroy everything. Okay, so what do we know? Well, it said men both old and young and all people from every quarter surrounded the house. That's Lot's house. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them carnally." What's this? This is gang rape. That's what they want to do to these men. This shows you their wickedness. How could Lot live in that kind of an environment? But notice, we can see that Lot has compromised his moral standards. And here's what you see. So Lot went out to them and through the doorway, shut the door behind him and said, "Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly." Now, does Lot know at this point that they're angels? No. He's just protecting what he believes are travelers. "See, now I have two daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you that you may do to them as you wish." Could you do that? Bring out your own daughters and offer them to a bunch of men to do with as you please. Now the Bible says Lot was righteous, but what? That's not righteous. And I don't know how he could do that. But the point is, he offered his daughters here to these men, and they were virgins, they were innocent. Of course, they're not interested in that, as it says here. "Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they've come under the shadow of my roof." Of course, what happens? They try to kill Lot and they try to break down the door. It says, they said, "Stand back." And then they said, "This one came to stay here and he keeps acting as a judge." Okay, what? Now he was standing at the gate trying to warn people not to come into this city. But what? He's come to stay here in Sodom and Gomorrah. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. Now let me show you what's happening here. They were struck blind, but what? Did they say, "Well, we better go find our houses"? What are they doing? They're still trying to get to these men. They're still trying to find the door to get to these men. It says, "God delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked." Lot was a righteous man, but he made a serious mistake. Okay? Lot and his family had become attached to Sodom. Now there's a psychological effect that happens to mankind. You know, sometimes we can be repulsed by something, but when we're continually surrounded by that influence, then we begin to kind of endure it, and then we'll kind of become a sympathizer and we even embrace it. Now let me give you a perfect example. It fits with this story. I can remember when I was young that homosexuality was looked upon or looked down on by everyone. But what's happened? We've been moving towards, well, they're born that way and they can't help it, and it's just an alternative lifestyle, and they want our sympathy. And what's happening now? People are embracing this and saying, it's okay. That's what happened to Lot and his family here. He moved into the city. He's enduring this, and he's even sympathizing with this and embracing this. Now, how do we know? Well, look at Genesis 19. If you were told that God is going to rain down fire and brimstone in this building, would I have to beg you to get out? What happens with Lot? He's told, and his family is told, God's going to rain down fire and brimstone on these cities, and you need to get out. Notice, when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of this city. And while he lingered, what? He's still hanging around. He's still sympathizing. He said, they took hold of his hand and his wife's hands and the hands of his 2 daughters, and the Lord being merciful to him, and brought him out and set him outside the city. Lot never really got out on his own. What the angels do, they took him by the hand with his wife and his 2 daughters that were there and set him outside the city. Now you know what happens, what they say. Go to the mountains and do not look back. Why? Well, anytime God gives us an opportunity to be saved, He expects us to have enough faith to obey Him. He has saved Lot. He saved Lot's wife and the 2 daughters. So He doesn't want them to look back. That's a simple request. But what? Lot's wife looks back. Now we can argue about why she would do that. We know she had some children there. She probably had grandchildren. But what? I believe she was still sympathetic to that city. And she didn't want to leave. Okay? What happened? As the result of that one decision to move towards Sodom and Gomorrah and to move into the city. Well, his children were destroyed, some within the city. Why? Well, they've been raised in Sodom and Gomorrah, so they have no regard for God's standard of righteousness. They're willing to marry godless men. And so Lot and his wife had son-in-laws and grandchildren probably in the city. You know, Lot goes to warn his son-in-laws, you need to get out of the city. Do they listen? It says the men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here? Son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, or whomever you have in the city, take them out of this place. For we will destroy this place because of the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord. Did the Lord know what was going on here? The Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his son-in-laws who had married his daughters and said, get up and get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But to his son-in-laws he seemed to be joking. What does that tell you? Lot was righteous. But what was the stronger influence? The city and all the wickedness of that city. and his precious daughters had married godless men who thought God was a joke. That's what they're saying. Oh, nothing's going to happen. You're just lying. You're just joking. Can you imagine? You can see why Lot's wife had to look back one more time to think about her daughters and grandchildren that were being destroyed in this city. But I don't know why she looked back, but we know she became a pillar of salt. And so the two married daughters that got out, they got out of Sodom, but Sodom didn't get out of them. What happens? Well, Lot and his two daughters go into the mountain. It says they're living in a cave. Why? Well, all of his wealth is gone. Everything was destroyed by the fire and brimstone on Sodom. So he has no money, no place to live. So what? He lives in a cave. And he's got two immoral daughters here, and they're wondering, where are we going to have children? What's happened? All the people that they knew has been killed. So what do? They get their father drunk, and both of them have sexual relations with their father, and that's where you get the nations of Moab and Ammon. So they may have got out of Sodom, but what? Sodom wasn't out of them. You can't associate with wickedness and expect your children to be righteous. And he lost his wife. I don't know how well you can see this picture, but I've got Lot and his two daughters fleeing to the mountains and a pillar of stone of this woman. God told her, don't look back. What we say, there are consequences to every decision that we make. It says, and it came to pass when they had brought them out, they said, escape for your life, and do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. Then the Lord rained down fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the city, and what grew on the ground. That's why it's desert over there now. God destroyed everything. He said, but his wife looked back and became behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. What a sad ending. Is it possible to lose everything by one bad decision? That's what we're wanting us to think about today. We make decisions every day. Some have more consequence than the other, but all of them have some consequence, good or bad. What happened to Lot? Well, he lost his wealth. It was all burned up in the cities of the plain. He went into Sodom full and he came out empty. He was an old man living in a cave with two immoral daughters. Here's a poverty-stricken old man dwelling in a mountain cave with two immoral daughters. Lot was saved, but what at a terrible cost. His children, his wife, and his wealth. Was it worth it? What do we know about Abraham? He prospered. He didn't have the water and the grass that Lot had, but what? God blessed him and he prospered. Lot chose the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and the plains there, and he lost everything. So, what's the lesson? Or lessons? Number one, selfishness and greed will destroy. Why did Lot choose the plains? Because it was well watered and grass. We must put God first in all of our decisions. I need to think about, what's this decision going to do to my soul and my righteous service of God? No one can compromise with sin. You may think, well, I'm going to convert them. I'm going to change them. How many people have married someone who's not a righteous man and thinking, I'm going to change him, I'm going to get him to do better? What happens? Sometimes they change the Christian. You cannot save the world by becoming a part of it. Did Lot save anybody by moving into the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah? No. Evil companionships do corrupt righteous people. And bad choices carry a heavy price. That's our lesson for this morning, and I hope it helps us all as we live here on this earth to realize that every day and every choice that I make has to be what's best for me and my relationship with God. But if you're not a Christian this morning, then we encourage you to think about your life and make the most important decision that you'll ever make, and that is to become a Christian, to become a child of God, to be righteous. And as we said, if you do that, God will richly bless you, both physically and spiritually. And that's going to be a decision you will never regret. And so if we can help you in any way this morning, we encourage you to come while we stand and sing.
Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay. Mold me and make me after